our ordinance, and it may be different now with the COA rules changing, with the exception of mixed use, have to provide affordable housing. And mixed use developments, instead of providing affordable housing, are allowed to give payment in lieu of, which goes into the COA fund. But anything over, I can't remember if it's 3 or 4 families, starts COA obligation in every zone except the mixed use development area before this change. You don't have to come for a use variance to start the COA obligation.
The difference is that it becomes the borough's obligation and it is not the developer's obligation. I.e., a developer can come into the R5 zone and let's just say builds a development of 100 units. They do not have to provide any affordable housing on site, but based on the new regulations, which part of them have been validated, it would seem that we would have a growth share percentage of that we would have to provide. But that does not mean that the developer has to provide it.
Well, that's why we have ordinances which put that burden on the developer. We didn't always follow it, and that's why we had this huge shortfall of affordable units, because we painted ourselves in the corner. We kept letting the developer get away with providing on site. And then when it came time, we collected 10,000 at first, then 15,000 per unit, and it was our obligation to provide it. And guess what? For years we were saying you can't provide a unit of affordable housing for 10 or 15,000. So we changed the ordinance and made the rate higher. However, what we have now is we have a developer building actually 2 huge developments that are, quote, for affordable housing, and there's a shell game happening where he's now able to sell off those affordable units to other developers for their obligation, COA obligation. So we're never up on affordable housing. We're still always in the same position because it comes at a shell game. And I really don't see how this is going to stop it. Let me ask you this. When you're talking about inclusionary, with this change, if a developer is going to provide affordable housing, does he then get to say, or she, where they're going to put it in town? Or is it, do they have to come before the board still?
I thought that was,
that was
already answered.
Well, I seem to get different answers here. So
I don't know how you get different answers when you didn't ask the question.
Okay.
The question was asked before. There is an ordinance in place that requires a developer, if they're going to provide it off-site, to have the approval
to come before the council. But
this does not propose to change that in any
this
way.
doesn't propose. That was my question.
It does not propose to change that.
Because my fear was that this is, when you read this, this is like, oh, it's wonderful. We're going to build these big buildings, and they're going to have river views, and we're going to get affordable housing. So my question is, where is that affordable housing going to be? Is it going to be all set, put off into the center of town by Undercliff Avenue and the middle of town, or is it going to be spread out throughout the town, which was in the spirit of Mount Laurel?
Well, that's not, obviously that's not addressed specifically in this ordinance. That'll be a decision for the council votes. That's just as we said to this.
My other question is traffic. And I understand you're talking about, higher buildings, you'll get a better view shed, and that might be true. But you're also increasing the density, which means more people. And, we have this huge development on the northern end of town in Fort Lee that's going to be developed. We only have one road, River Road, to get in and to get out of. And now you're proposing more density on the southern end of town. And how is the traffic going to affect us? Because it's not just commercial use. You're talking residential. I mean, this is a huge, issue here for us. We can't move as it is. And I've heard you several times saying, well, high rise, don't bring children. But you got a lot of density here. We just expanded our school for the 3rd time, and we're already at capacity. And now we're looking to bring more people here. When we did the original master plan in 1999, 2000, Kevin, you were part of that. And part of the facilities element said that Edgewater is built out to capacity at 10,000 residents. Well, we know we're past that now. We're 11,000 and something now. And now we're looking to add more. And I just don't understand why we're picking this specific area. And I understand, you know, what's said here that, well, you know, that development was already approved. Well, that's a problem. That's a problem when you have a board that consistently grants variances. In fact, in complete disregard for how it's going to affect the town. So we have this overdevelopment. We have our schools at capacity. We have our roads and our infrastructure, and you know, the EMTs and the firemen and the police, you know, all have to be increased to keep up with this. And yet we're here in 2012, soon to be 2013, looking to add more. And I don't understand this. And you know, you may say that, well, it's, you know, it's there already, we're just going to make them conforming. Well, 99% of Edgewater homes are non-conforming. Are you going to propose to change every home? Because my home is non-conforming. Every home on my block, every home is non-conforming. And it's really wagging the tail, you know, it's wagging the tail for the dog. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to say, let's change this because this is what they're doing anyway. And in fact, in the paper, my head almost exploded when I read Greg Fran's comment that zoning is fluid. You see what the market brings you, you know, with the development, and then you adjust your zoning. No, you guys have the power to set the tone, to set the development. It's you. This is where it's supposed to come from. Every other town, go to Montvale. I would love to see you try to put this through in Montvale. You know, you go to any other town and they're the ones who control the development.
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
You've been going on for 13 minutes now and you haven't asked a question in the last 5 minutes. Do you have any?
So that's your input to here? That I'm annoying you because I'm talking too long? Because I get to talk for 5 minutes one time and that annoys you? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Am I really annoying you? You know what annoys me? It annoys me that you're going to change this and add financial incentives for a developer, and I don't get financial. My taxes go up every quarter.
Ms. Barnes, at no point.
Thank you.
I just politely asked.
No, I'm sorry. I'm annoying you. I'm sorry. You have someplace better to be. What time is it? 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock? I get 5 minutes. I've been to 5 minutes, and that annoys you? Sorry.
Anybody else in the public wish to be heard?
I'll say something.
Please.
Go ahead, you go. You go ahead, I just work it. No, go ahead.
Nana Grecovi, 88 14 Churchill Road.
Can you spell your last name, please?
K-R-I-C-K-O-V-I-C.
Okay.
I have a few questions. Maybe we can start with this little article in the paper that says that we are trying to put the buildings upward rather than horizontally, so that we can open the views for the river and the city. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the comment I made that at the last council meeting as well.
Right. But the thing is, like, we go to, let's say, Hyde Park, it was approved for 25 units per acre and only 6 stories. But now we are going to 100 units per acre, so we're going 400% over that, let's say, Hyde Park was approved. We are going 20% over from 45% coverage at Hyde Park to 55% coverage at the urban zone. And then we are going at height from 6 to maybe 25 and even 28 stories if we take into consideration all the type of bonuses developer gets as far as coal and kind of thing. So if we are going so much more invested in the coverage, how are we going to increase the use?
So we're going to comparing apples and oranges because iPark doesn't has a residential density, but it also has 100,000 square feet of commercial space, which is not included in your calculation. So again, apples and oranges, you can't compare the two because you have a mixed use here, you're just talking about residential here. So I don't know that that's a fair comparison. And number two, the difference here is that this particular district actually has streets. And at least it does have one major street that actually looks through towards the water. But the rest of it is, well, actually, we're not quite sure how the rest of it's going to flesh out at this point. But based on the original plan, there were really no views to the water. And I was not around when that was crafted, so I'm not quite sure why, but the intent was a walkable pedestrian environment. And unfortunately, really, only the one street here is going to be the one that has the views to the water. And so therefore here, with a singular development, that ratio that I was talking about, the height to the lot coverage, hopefully will provide other vistas on this property so that we'll open it up and still have some views here left along the water spots.
Does it say that the development can have only one building or it has to build with a multiple building? Because this is approximately 15-acre property.
Well, the ordinance right now, as I believe it reads, is that you're only allowed to have one building. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be necessarily one spire like this. It could be a longer building in this land, maybe have multiple heights. So I think everyone thinks high-rise, they think it's just going to be one singularly tall building. But because it's a larger property, there could be some design aspects to that particular building that will still create the views and maybe not create as tall a building, maybe create a little bit longer and taller at different points. So, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen on the property, but right now, if you're going to put in more than one building on the property, then you need to come in for a variance for that.
When we specify the outside zone, which is next to the shady side, then we actually specify the length of the building has to be perpendicular to the river road. Does that, there are no restrictions for the outside buildings on the east side of the river road? Any comments on that?
I don't think that I wrote that in here, and I.
For the shady
think
side?
Yes, because
But
these
for
buildings,
here, we didn't
right,
have-
these buildings are located here and here, and they are perpendicular to River Road. So the same would have to be true here, and that's something that we can.
Shouldn't that be incorporated?
I think it should be incorporated, for sure, but that doesn't mean that we want to limit it to be a rectangular building. I'm hoping and anticipating that maybe there'd be some, a nicely designed building, because it's really our last spot, really, for us to be able to provide some interesting architecture. So I wouldn't want to limit it, although I think that is a good recommendation that it should be at least focused linearly towards the water. But again, it might have a unique shape. I really don't know what that's going to be because it is large property, but I think it's a good recommendation because we do want to keep some of the vistas.
I would like to ask you something. In the 55% coverage, that does not include the garage and the other accessory buildings. So the coverage could actually go all the way to 75%. Which if you build a garage in a 4-story or 5-story, it would still block the views to the river.
Not necessarily. We're not quite sure how that's going to. Let me double check how we phrased our.
Because in Imperial's coverage is 75% and the building is 55%, and the building is only building on its own 55%, which I think at a 15-acre property, that's a huge coverage of 55%. I wish it was down to 25 or 30%. Then we know we would have a tower of 25, 30 stories, so it would be very, very slim down.
The parking garage is included in building coverage, but it's not included in gross floor area.
So it's included in
Right, it's included in building coverage. The difference is why it's not included in gross floor area is because, and just typically the definition of gross floor area, parking requirements are often based on gross floor area, and you'd be double counting if you counted parking areas. So therefore, parking garages are not included in gross floor area, but they are included in building coverage.
Let me ask you another question. When we go back to Maybach, which some of the zoning, like Annex D3 zone,
Yes.
was actually established on, was actually this building, it was 8-story high.
Yes.
It was a glass structure, and the Board of Adjustment was very clear that they want exactly this glass building. And that's the only way that they will let this project go forward. So they were asking for a certain type of building that wouldn't look very heavy, very dominant, like let's say brick building with small windows, but rather a glass structure that would have, in this particular case, maybe over 90% of the glass. Would that be something that maybe we could get as a residence that live around, so that we don't look at some dominant structure that is really, really heavy, but rather something that is light, and that will reflect light and reflect maybe the river, the sky, the greenery around, something that will be like this? Would that be a good suggestion?
Can I just look?
Something that will be very light, not a shade.
Do you want to, I'm going to pass this around? I mean, that could be a very good recommendation to sort of lighten up a taller structure. While we can't dictate exactly what the building can be, we could provide some, typically you can't, you can direct architectural styles, but you can't require them. However, we may be able to require things like, you could, above the 6th story, you have to use glass, or 90% of the building needs to be glass, or, but you can dictate sort of materials, but not architectural styles. So that may be a consideration. I'm not sure how the planning board feels about that. On a personal level, I would tend to agree with them. Rather than having a sort of a massive structure, but to have something that is a little bit lighter, looks kind of nice. Again, architecture is subjective, but in terms of requirements of building materials, that may be something the planning board wants to recommend. I don't know how the planning board feels about that.
I would like to
Any other
mention,
questions?
I would like to mention something. We live right across the borehole, and our views and whatever is going to be affected a lot. So we would like to see something that is light, so it's going to block the views of the river, okay. But something that will reflect the light so we could see the river or whatever, rather than some very dominant brick building that would completely dominate the area and completely cut us. I Park, even though it's only 6-story high, just about 90%, 80 maybe % blocked our views, even with only 6 story. This building could be really big. I would actually suggest that 55% coverage goes down to maybe 35, and rather go up in the air, but make the building taller, but not the building that would dominate the area as far as size and the footprint of the building.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public? State your name, spell your last name and your address, please.
Kathy Krukovic, 8814 Churchill Road, North Brigham.
Spell your last name.
Krickovic. I have a question about traffic. Was there a traffic impact assessment done in preparation of this rezoning analysis?
No,
Why not?
because it is not required when you do zoning. You don't have to do traffic impact studies.
But with such a huge increase in density,
Well, again, you're making the assumption, number one, there'll be a huge increase in density, and number two, you're making the assumption that somehow the last portion of basically development that will occur in Edgewater is going to create a massive amount of traffic, which isn't necessarily true. If you take a look, high-rise buildings not only produce less children, they do produce less traffic. So, unfortunately, the questions are asked making assumptions, but that's not necessarily true.
how many more units are we adding to Edgewater by this rezoning?
It depends on the developer. I mean, I can't, that's
By
like.
changing the zone, if you're going from 25 units per acre to 100 units per acre in a certain zone, then you're adding 75 units per acre. Did you calculate what is the impact of rezoning in terms of units? Is it 500 units or 5,000 units? Do you understand my question?
Yes, no, I understand your
Let's
question.
say if it was zoned before for additional 500 units, by rezoning, are we adding additional 5,000 units, 10,000 units to Edgewater? What is the number?
It depends on the folks.
No, in total. You rezoned certain lots, which were zoned for a certain density, you changed the density by rezoning, so you increased the number of units in each lot. What is the total number of units we're adding to Edgewater? Do you understand my question?
I think I'm following that you say we changed zonings and we increased the density. That's not true. What we try to do is, that's why we have the 3 different zones. And Catherine, jump at any time when I mess up. That's why we did the 3 zones. There's one property, North Star, is that development, North Star development? That's 14 stories, that's approved by the
Yes.
Board of Adjustment? That's MXD1, correct?
That's mostly 2.
2, I'm sorry, 2. Yeah, so 2. That's 14. Then we went down to 2, which is 6 and 5 or lower. Catherine? MXD1 is what? How many stories?
MXD1 is 5 stories.
5 stories. And then we went to
MXD2 is 14 and MXD3 is
MXD3.
9.
All the properties you're just talking about, except for some, the ones back over there, were already approved.
Okay, so we don't know what the total amount of addition.
But you're asking a question, what would a developer put over there? Catherine would have known that.
No, that's not my question. If it's zoned, if it used to be zoned for 25 units per acre, and somebody has 2 acres, they were allowed to build 50 units. If it's rezoned now to 20-story high building with 100 units per acre, now we can allow 200 units. So we're going from 50 units to 200, so the increase is 150.
It's good, the problem.
Without any variances.
The problem with your question is that your question assumes that there is green fallow land in all the zones that were sitting there. When the reality is 90% of that land has already been approved for development. And so there will not be an exponential growth in the number of units because they're along the waterfront. I believe there's only, one major parcel to be developed, and there's a couple of parcels on the other side of the river. So candidly, what you're asking is an impossible question to answer because one, we do not know what the developers are going to develop. It is up to their right. They can do as little or as much as they would like up to the zoning regulations, up to the zoning ordinance. And 2, a lot of what has already been approved is already going to be there. So this zoning ordinance will not change or increase the density on those portions of land.
Okay, so let's talk about the riverfront property. That's the only property left. How many units does this zoning allow on that lot?
I don't know. I don't know the exact acreage of the property off the top of my head.
I would like to show you pictures of traffic jam on River Road as it is right now. Northbound, southbound, and that's on daily basis. And in both directions, sometimes depending on how the lights are related to, north and southbound. So I think the traffic study is very relevant, especially with this R5 zone for the riverfront property. I think that should be done to see the traffic impact, if it wasn't done already. Second question I have, what is the tallest building in Edgewater right now on the riverfront? Sorry, do you know? What is the tallest existing building on the riverfront?
Hudson Harbor.
How many stories is that?
Oh, it's over 12.
Closer to 20.
20 stories?
Yes, how many stories? How many stories is that?
12, I mean 20?
20 maybe?
Maybe twice.
That's not really.
Okay.
It's 12 houses.
I don't think it's 12, but it's not 20. I don't think it's 20.
The answer is we're not sure. We're not sure.
I have a question. On the R5 zone, it says here that the high-rise building is 20 stories high or 220 feet. Now, you're applying a sliding scale of building coverage and building height, meaning that building height may be increased by 1 story or 10 feet for each percentage decrease in the building coverage. What is the maximum height of the building that could possibly be built there, based on your notes? Could it go from 20 to 30 stories if they decrease the?
Yes, it could.
So it could be 30, it could be 40-story building.
Depends on the, whatever building coverage they propose.
So the 20-story is not the maximum height of the building.
No.
Another question I have is this area in the flood zone, the I Park and the new R5 zone, is that considered a flood zone?
I don't know.
Would anybody know if that's considered a flood zone?
Flood zone is all changing right now. You know, under current zoning, there is a 100-year floodplain, which building, you know, the state, and various government agencies have looked at how high water has gotten in the last 100 years, where it's anticipated to go in the next 100 years. And obviously, in the last 2 years, we've had 2 mega storms, if you would, and all that stuff is out the window. And the federal government is going to be coming in at some point in the next couple of years, hopefully sooner than later, giving new guidelines what the minimum height, you know, minimum start point of building will be. But right now, everything being built is being built within the current zones and regulations and whatnot set forth by higher authorities.
And realistically, those kinds of questions go more towards building codes and building requirements, and that is something that will be one as
I brought it up earlier and just think, you know, I work, many of them people here know I work EMS. I worked overnight on Sandy, and we sat at Old Borough Hall and watched the water come all the way up to the 4th step of stuff. And it was just crazy, and you know, this storm was never supposed to happen, and I think it will happen more often in reality. And you know, but there's regulations out there, and the state and federal government are the ones that set these rules, you know, on how to build things. And once they set the new rules, we'll modify our rules to conform with their rules.
Which points me to another question. Was there any flooding analysis done before the rezoning was prepared?
Once again, flood analysis would be,
Like engineering, or, you know, somebody who took a look at this?
First of all, the flooding analysis has not been done in the past 3 weeks, because realistically, obviously with Sandy and National Hurricane, this is a current issue on everyone's minds. However, that is something that really goes to building code standards, and that is not before this board. What is before is the types and the densities of buildings that can go there, the types of uses, and so that's really as the building code standards as to what flood appropriate building measures will be, and that's something that FEMA, the state, the Department of Community Affairs will dictate, and that's not something that's before this board right now.
I have one more question for Ms. Marshall. On what basis did you decide for this area to become R5 zone, the last month on the riverfront? Did you use any materials? What prompted you to say this is R5 when there's no high-rise buildings along the riverfront in the southern end?
These are 2 high-rise buildings right here.
Well, they're not directly on the riverfront, probably east of River Road.
But they're still in the vicinity.
I'm sorry?
They're still in the vicinity. Well, actually, I've addressed that in probably every prior meeting. What I've talked about is based on the developments that have occurred, based on the amount of commercial areas that are located within this district, I thought that to provide more residential density would actually help to have people walk to places rather than drive to places. You put a commercial development here, and again, you're gonna draw more people from out of town, which I understand that, you know, we have to do a check and balance, because that could provide more incentive, a better economy to a certain extent for Edgewater. But the check and balance system is what's too much. iPark came in with a post office shop, and we have a couple of supermarkets in town. How much is too much? There's really a sort of a breaking point. So therefore, I felt that it was more appropriate to have residential here at a higher density, to create that density, to help out with the areas that we proposed throughout here, to try to create more walkable environments, so people would walk places instead of getting into their cars and getting on River Road. So that was really the impetus why I had proposed rezoning at R5.
Why does it have to be a high-rise building? Why not height of the iPark building?
Because then what's going to happen is you're not going to have use of the water.
We're not going to have what?
You're not going to have use of the water.
No, I'm talking about the height of the building. Why would we have use of the water? If you can put a 40-story high tower, which is going to block the views and create more shade. I don't understand the logic behind it.
The taller, skinnier building is going to create more vistas to the water. Then what's going to happen there is the property will probably most likely end up getting subdivided. You will have many 7-story buildings located along the property and will block all of the views to the water.
How do you know that?
That is the difference of what would happen.
So it's not designed for one tall tower, it's designed for several towers, which could be 20,
No, she
30,
didn't,
40
she didn't
stories
say
high.
that. She said that if you didn't have the high rise, somebody else could come in, they want to subdivide this and have multiple 7-story buildings.
Or they could provide technically one that was attached. I don't think that's going to be the same perspective with allowing the taller structure and the sliding scale, because we don't have the sliding scale for the R3s and R4 zones. We have the sliding scale for the high-rise zone with the anticipation that in order to provide a taller building, there will be more vistas to the water. In providing a 7-story building, it might be, look like, it might, from the top, it might look like an 8, like a big 8, which would end up taking up a significant portion of the property, because obviously there needs to be a certain amount of density to develop the property, and et cetera, et cetera. So the configuration would be different. So our anticipation is that a high-rise building would preserve those vistas versus a 7-story structure, which I would anticipate either subdivision or a configuration of building that would be fairly massive and probably end up blocking.
Kevin, if I may?
Yes.
I mean, on that point, we've had a couple meetings where we discussed this plan and the concept of larger, low buildings versus the high buildings, and I was initially under the same impression as yourself. Aren't we better with a longer 6-story building than a skinny 20 or 30-story building? And as it was drawn out to me, it's like you have these view corridors that if you have a 7-story building, nobody gets to see the water. It's blocked by the whole thing. Take some of the other developments that already exist, and some of the ones down in North Bergen and south of us. You have these big complexes that are big, wide buildings, and nobody gets to enjoy that view or have the light or whatnot. You build a tall, skinny building, and you can have a density where people are using mass transit versus driving. Most of the people are commuters into the city, so jump on the bus or the ferry and various things, and we've talked about it. Potentially adding another ferry service at the south end of town, for example, to help with some traffic. But there's development going on all around us as well that we can't control. North Bergen, as you know, has all sorts of development going on in the waterfront, and that's adding traffic. So you have all those folks driving up to the GW and the people in Fort Lee and above driving down to the tunnel. So I think the majority of the traffic that we're seeing, unfortunately, and I live in this town, I experience this traffic as most everyone in this room, is not Edgewater traffic. It's transient traffic going from, going to the tunnel or the bridge or somewhere else.
The ferry.
What have you. So we really can't control that. We can try and design and put the zoning in to best build, balancing the needs of the community, the needs of businesses, the green front and green zones and all these different aspects, and try to just balance it as best we can.
I agree with you 100%. If this was zoned for one tall building, but she just said it could be multiple buildings.
She
So
needs
I
to
don't-
be multiple in a zone. If you have a certain density, and most of these spots already have something going on. So there's only 1 or 2, 3 spots that anything could go on. Everything else has something on it already of some sort.
Kathy, I think this is clarification. Did you say you could have multiple high-rise buildings there?
No, I mean, unless there was some type of subdivision, and then you're talking about attic streets and the like. So with that said, if there was to be more than one high-rise, there would at least there would be streets and vistas. So, but likely it wouldn't be the same with the 7-story or 4 to 7-story type of structure as we've seen along the east side of River Road. Those types of developments, there's no open vistas really. So.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public wish to be heard? Well, name, spell your last name and your address, please.
Katie Jones, Jones, 359 Undercliff Avenue, Edgewater, New Jersey. I'm sorry, excuse me, sir, what is your name?
My name is Keith Barrett.
Keith Barrett?
Yes.
Oh, because you don't have a, and your name is?
P. Phil,
I don't know
I
what.
had it up there. I think you're.
No, that's Vincent. I'm not Vincent.
That's Delmo.
Because I'm curious, because you say North Bergen and Fort Lee, the developments there, they'll be driving, but in Edgewater, we'll be using mass transit.
No, I didn't say that.
Yeah, I think you did.
No, I didn't say that. I said the majority of the larger buildings that are going in, if you look at some of the towers that exist today, and there was pictures taken of traffic, if you put a camera at those buildings and watch the traffic coming in, there's very little traffic going in and out of
Well, I really don't need a camera. I drive up and down River Road every day, and it's impossible to get in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then when I come home later on in the day, between 6 and 7 from Northern Bergen County, it's impossible to get into Edgewater. And I can't imagine why no one in Fort Lee, Edgewater, or North Bergen doesn't sit down and coordinate all this development, because it is out of control. And as for 100-year storms, we know that's over with. There is climate change. It is a flood zone. And maybe if these high-rises should be they should have specs for high winds, because we just had a Category 1. And if we get a Category 2, the whole, I'm going to have a riverfront property up on Undercliff. So these are things that should be taken into consideration when you do start passing all this stuff. Another question is, Mr. Franz said, again, I was a little taken aback by that statement also, that the zoning is fluid as to what the developer wants, and then we have incentives for the developer. And is it just what one developer wants or all developers? Because if we're just going to do whatever any developer wants, I can't imagine why everyone isn't rushing to Edgewater to develop and do whatever they darn well please, because you'll zone for it. And that's what the market will allow. And then we can have competition, and then maybe we can really have an attractive waterfront as opposed to just having things cut and paste and stuck in town, and we just get what we get. And we get promises, but then down the road, things never come to fruition. I was in Westwood about a year ago downtown, and I called Valerie and I said, Westwood is lovely downtown. She goes, yeah, they had the same planner as us, except they followed their master plan. We didn't. We just decide we're going to throw everything out the window after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on plans, and we just say, we're going to shove a high-rise here and shove a high-rise there. So my question is now, if I win the Powerball this week, can I go down to Shady Side and develop anywhere I want? Will you zone for my specs? Will you say, you know what? She's got the money, she wants to do it, and then can I get everything zoned the way I like it? I don't understand. We're a community that should have some kind of character and some kind of a theme. And then all we do is just give away and give away. And I don't understand how we benefit as residents that way. You say, that these high-rises are not going to bring children. Well, we heard that with Avalon. We heard Mr. Christensen tell us that. And as we heard before, we've expanded the school 3 times now, and we're to capacity. We have six kindergartens. And these people, you have these buildings that are rental, and so we have a real transient population, which does well for the powers that be, but it really doesn't do well for someone like me who likes my house and likes my town and wants to stay here. But yet I'm footing the bill all the time, where these people come in, they swell our roles in the schools, and then they leave and they don't pay it forward. So you're not really developing a community. You're developing I don't know what you're developing. I guess you're developing some sort of corporate headquarters for someone, and the rest of us, you know, it doesn't really matter. And again, you do violate the spirit of Mount Laurel when you don't require these affordable housing units to be within the complexes. Because I know my neighborhood is stuck with it, and I'm, you know, enough is enough. I don't begrudge anyone a place to live, but you have to spread it around. You can't get wise neighborhoods. I'm a taxpayer, and I went and paid taxes again on a house today, and I was like, what? My taxes went up another couple of $100 this quarter, and I keep hearing about ratables and ratables, but yet every quarter my taxes go up. So I can't even imagine with all this stuff that you're going, and the density will go up because when you build, they will come. You know, it happened in Long Island. Everybody knows if you build it, they will come. So I don't understand when you say it won't become more dense. If you have a blank piece of property and you build on it, it becomes more dense. It's as simple as that. Regardless whether it's already approved on paper, once it gets built, it becomes more dense. It's as simple as that. So I just don't see the benefit. I really don't see the benefit for any of us. I don't know. Can you tell me how you benefit when, you know, we allow people to come into our community and just decide, dictate how we're going to build it? How does that benefit us? How come we don't have a theme? I sat in on meetings for that ball field, and it was supposed to have a nautical look, and it was supposed to look like a little boardwalk on the river and all this stuff. I don't see any of that happen. You know, you just sit and you go through these meetings, you go through the motions, and nothing comes to fruition. And I just can't comprehend how this continually goes on. And everybody, you know, you're blank. Why are we allowing, you know, is it one developer or is it any developer that can come into town and do this? How does that work? He said it's fluid. How does that work?
Is that your question? I mean,
Yeah, that's my question. Is it one developer that gets to dictate how we zone, or anybody can come into town that wants to develop? And then do we change the zoning to go along with what they want? Because that's what you're doing. You're changing the zoning to accommodate what people want to build. So how does that work? Is it everybody?
The zoning is being changed because the approvals of significant.
So you're going back, you're backtracking, you've already pre-approved stuff?
You're not amending. First of all, the principle of zoning is that you want things to have a design, and you want them to be able to, you want items built there that are compliant with the
Yeah, I
zone.
got that. It's
Right?
never happened.
Well, but the whole point is, over the last 10 years, the southern portion of the property of the borough there have been significant variances, which are, one, not before this board, beyond our control. Those are all approvals or buildings that have been built. It is incumbent upon the new master plan recommendations that were promulgated by this board and that this proposed ordinance complies with, to attempt to make these existing approvals and structures legal, so that if they go
So they're illegal right now?
no, they have a variance, but you want them to be compliant with the zone. You want them to be permitted use in the zone, and you want the setbacks, et cetera, to be compliant. So there's a cohesive zone so everyone's playing by the same rules.
So we get a master plan, we totally ignore it, we grant variances, and then we backtrack to make it seem okay, we smooth it out and say, no, we meant this from the beginning.
Well, you're going back a decade. What we're looking at is
Well,
what
you can't ignore the past, it's from
Exactly.
where we come.
You're right, we can't ignore the past.
But we
The past-
can try to do something about the future.
But the past tells us that we have a significant waterfront development that
We,
is
excuse me, you live in Edgewater?
the borough.
No, do you live in Edgewater?
I don't live here.
Okay, I'm just curious,
I'm saying,
because when you
but-
say we, I don't know what you mean.
Well, I'm speaking on behalf of the planning board.
No, I'm just saying, you're speaking on behalf of a board, but I don't know if you know the history, and I don't know if you know how it is to live in a situation where you can't even get to the store. Christmas is upon us, and believe me, I used to work at 115 River Road, and quite frankly, I never left the office because I knew what lunch would be like. I mean, I know, and that was
Well, we don't-
6 years ago.
But you don't have the legal authority to take away approvals and have buildings deconstructed. And so our obligation as a planning board
Is to make it all better.
is to make as many of the plot blocks and lots in the borough to be compliant with and permitted uses and permitted, and so that's the basis of the amendment.
So is it just one, or now, if anybody else comes in and they want to do something different, do we rezone again?
No, they'll have to go for a variance if they want to do something that's not
Oh,
compliant.
okay. So it's not really that fluid. It's, well, what did that mean, fluid?
I'm not Mr. France, I can't
Well,
speak.
did you ever speak with him?
Yes,
Do you know him?
yes.
Okay. You never had this conversation with him? You never talk, you don't talk about this sort of thing when you're
I don't
having a drink
have
together?
I
Okay.
don't have a drink.
All right. And now, with
Any other
regards,
questions?
Yes, and this, do you have any questions about the actual elements?
please don't push my button. I have one more question. I want to know about the green space. Now, you're saying you're going to put it on the roofs? Is it going to be
I'm not doing
required?
anything.
Hmm?
I'm not doing anything. It's permitted to.
All right, never mind. Is it going to go on roofs or?
That's the plan, but that's the person to answer the
Well,
question.
she's not doing anything. She
I'm not trying to-
she just told me she's not doing anything. So who's going to answer that question? Is it going to be, is the green space going to be required, or is it just a suggestion? Is it going to be required?
Green space is required in every zone.
Yeah, but here you're saying that you're going to put it on the roofs.
No, I didn't, no, that's not what it says.
What does it say?
It says that it counts towards your green space if you provide any green.
It counts towards.
Yes, it does.
Pass it.
So if you're not going to have any setbacks, what else counts towards it? Flower boxes? That's something you had done in the past. I don't know you specifically, but I know that that was something that was allowed in the
The
past.
planning board and zoning board have reviewed enough applications where they understand what a green roof means.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I said the planning board and the zoning board have reviewed enough applications so they know what a green roof means. It does not mean flower boxes outside schools.
Well, it has meant that in the past.
I'm unaware of any application.
Well, I am aware of it, and it has meant that in the past. I don't know when you people came on the scene, but you should be aware of that.
You have a question, Katie?
Yeah, excuse me?
You have a question?
Yeah, is it, or if, how, what is going to be required as green space?
It'll be dependent on the individual application. We cannot predict that.
There's no set percentage. So every time somebody comes, we can do setbacks, and we can cut it back, and then there's no requirement that if it's not on the ground, that you don't have to put it on the roof. It's individual. Now, how individual is it? Is it if you like the person, you don't like the, how individual does it get?
The definition of impervious coverage is a certain.
I understand the definition of it, but you're not saying that they are required to have a set amount of it, with each development. Now, you just saw your 10th 100-year storm in the last 10 years, and the reason why these things happen is because, the water has nowhere to go. So that's my question. You start building all this stuff up. There was an article in the New York Times this weekend, and it said, it might not be 50 years, it might not be 100 years, but New York City is going to be underwater, and we are the mirror image on the opposite side of the Hudson River. So these are things you have to take into consideration. You can't live in a bubble, and you can't think that these things aren't going to happen, and you can't wait for the federal government to say what's mandated and what's not mandated. You have to look at what's going on and see what happened in the past week, and what happened last year, and what happened, 6 months before that, and then last October 29th, and you have to start looking at these things. And if you don't have any place for this water to go, and you don't have a requirement for it, we're going to have problems again.
There is an impervious coverage ratios or percentages that are in each zone. I'm not going to go through them all, but these are all industry standard and generally accepted by the professionals.
And it's standardized, and it's applied to each individual application.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public? Close to the public. Catherine, we had a few discussions. She's talking about the high-rise. I want to thank Kate for bringing up Avalon. Reminds me, do we know the number of children that came out of Avalon? I believe it's 85 to 100? 90 to 100.
When did you say 70?
I have,
Including-
70s, I thought 70 kids now.
I think.
No, it's on 90, it was up to 90 the last time I checked.
Last time we did. That's one reason. When we were talking, Catherine, we wanted one of the zones, the MXD3, correct? That's a recommendation to this board.
Yes.
I think all the boards agreed with that. Also, there was a discussion about making for the MXD3, there were some areas that do exceptions, where the setback would be a little more.
That's 1 and 2.
What's 1 and 2?
Yeah, MXD 1
MXD 1 and 2. Is that your suggestion? The setbacks for MXD 1 and 2. I mean, there were some prior approvals.
Correct.
0 and 10.
Oh, it's 1 and 3, sorry.
1 and 3. Is that one recommendation that for further future development that is not approved, we can make the setbacks a little better?
For the MXD3 zone.
Yes.
Is it
I know, go ahead.
no, what I was gonna say is, everybody keeps talking about setbacks, and, one of the women were west of downtown Westwood. Downtown Westwood has no setbacks between the buildings. And the reason for the setback between the buildings to not have a setback is to create a fluid pedestrian environment. So there aren't these vehicular breaks in between, and that was the intent. So to change, MXD3 may be appropriate, and what it comes down to is how the lots have been configured.
That's what we're asking.
The Maybach project did not have a setback, or it was very, very minimal. I'm trying to remember because I did it for the application, but its setback from Oakland Road was very, very small if it had one. Now, again, like I said, the intent is to create that pedestrian environment. And so the MXD3 zone, it may be more appropriate to incorporate the standards of the MXD2 zone.
For the setbacks?
For the setbacks.
Okay.
I agree with that. But the MXD1 zone, because it's actually, when you take a look at, the map, with the exception of the little gray piece that sticks up, it is near Shadyside. And so we were hoping to have more of a fluid pedestrian environment.
I agree with you. That actually, people that live there have asked for that over the years.
So, yeah, it's basically when you have those setbacks, side-to-side setbacks, it ruins that fluid nature of the pedestrian environment, because you have these breaks and